The night was bitter snow swirling across Chicago's streets when Ethan Walker, a millionaire lost in numbers, stepped out of a glittering restaurant. His phone rang, his driver waved. The city pulsed with noise, yet he froze. From a dark alley came a fragile voice. "Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this bread." He turned, saw a barefoot girl, her hands trembling as she cradled a moldy loaf like a miracle. Behind her, two smaller figures stirred in the shadows. His chest tightened, his world tilted. He never imagined that within moments this fragile scene would tear apart the walls he had built around his life. If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you silently, arranging everything then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. Chicago glittered under a merciless winter sky, frost gripping the steel towers, while the wind slashed through alleys like a knife. Yet inside the Viridian Conservatory, warmth and luxury reigned. Chandeliers poured gold across white tablecloths, candles shimmered in mirrored walls, and murmurs in French and Italian floated like background music. The contrast between inside and outside could not have been starker. In a quiet corner, Ethan Walker sat where he always sat, a man of discipline and precision. His Armani suit was immaculate, his laptop open Bluetooth pressed to his ear. Investors from Tokyo spoke numbers, deadlines, promises of 15 million on the line. But for Ethan, it was another routine conquest. Profit was his rhythm, numbers his second tongue, and the conservatory his fortress, no interruptions allowed. Until tonight. At first, it was only a shadow moving across the marble, small, out of place. Then a whisper threaded through the air, so soft it silenced crystal glasses and stilled the hum of conversation. "Please, sir, may I have some bread? Even just the old kind. I'm hungry." The words belonged to a child no more than 6. She stood barefoot in the snow-dusted entryway, her thin coat trembling around her shoulders. Gordon Hale, the owner, wasted no time. His voice boomed through the glittering room. "Get out! This is not a shelter. Out now, and don't come back." His fury ricocheted off glass and marble. Patrons lowered their eyes, unwilling to see. The girl's lips pressed together. She did not beg. She simply turned her small shoulders, shaking as she slipped out the door. Snowflakes drifted in behind her. For the briefest instant, Ethan looked up. He saw the glisten of tears. She would not shed the fragile dignity in her silence. Something inside him shifted. A crack, faint but real. But then came the sharp reminder in his ear, "Mr. Walker, are you with us?" He forced the image away, locked his jaw, and drove the deal forward. 40 minutes later, signatures sealed another triumph. He closed his laptop, adjusted his tie, and stepped into the bitter night air. Chicago roared with taxis and footsteps. Ethan slid on his sunglasses, though the sun was gone, telling himself it had been nothing. Just a distraction. Yet the ghost of that little girl in the snow followed him, refusing to let go. Snow drifted across Chicago's streets like pale ash, twisting in the wind that shrieked between steel and glass towers. Ethan Walker pulled his coat tighter as he left the Viridian Conservatory, the city's most polished restaurant, where another lucrative deal had just closed. His shoes struck sharp notes against the icy pavement, each step a victory march. The night should have been triumphant. 15 million secured, investors appeased. Yet, beneath the rhythm of figures echoing in his mind lingered an image he wanted desperately to forget. The girl, barefoot, trembling, asking for bread. He clenched his jaw, shook off the thought, and walked faster. Chicago in December was merciless. To stand still was to invite frostbite. But as he passed a narrow lane called Kinsley Alley, a voice carried from the shadows. So faint it could have been mistaken for wind, yet it rooted him in place. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this bread. Ethan's breath curled white into the air. Bread, slowly against all reason, he turned. The alley stretched like a wound in the city lit by a flickering bulb above a service door. Trash bins lined the wall, snow piled against rusted metal. And somewhere in that darkness the voice continued, "Please help my sister sleep tonight without crying." The words struck harder than any corporate ambush. Against instincts honed by decades of discipline, Ethan stepped into the alley. Each crunch of his shoes against broken glass echoed like trespass. The deeper he went, the colder it became, as if sorrow itself clung to these bricks. Then he saw her, the same child from the restaurant, kneeling in the snow beside a toppled trash can. In her hands lay a hunk of bread so rotten it seemed more fungus than food. Yet her expression was reverent. Her lips moved in prayer, her eyes lifted in gratitude. She clutched the bread as though it were the treasure, not refuse. Ethan stopped cold. He had faced billionaires who bluffed with fortunes, politicians who masked lies in silk rivals, who wielded power like a knife. None of it prepared him for this, a child thanking heaven for poison. The girl noticed him and flinched. Her hands closed tighter around the bread, her shoulders tense. Fear flashed across her face, mingled with defiance. "I won't do anything bad, mister," she whispered. "I was just saying thank you. I won't dirty your clothes." The apology, unnecessary and heartbreaking, struck deeper than any insult he had endured. For a moment he couldn't answer. His throat tightened before words finally escaped. You're going to eat that?" She nodded quickly, her determination startling. "Yes, it's still good, just a little green. I can scrape it off." He stepped closer and the truth hit him. The loaf wasn't a little green. It was infested mold crawling across its crust. His stomach turned, but the girl's pride didn't waver. "It came from the conservatory," she explained. "They throw away bags of food. This one was just from yesterday." She spoke as if she had won a prize, as though scavenging refuse was triumph. What Ethan heard wasn't survival. It was hope, stubborn and misplaced. "Your sister?" he asked quietly, following her gaze. A smaller figure shifted behind a stack of boxes. A girl, no older than 4, peeked out, wrapped in a filthy blanket, her eyes wide with suspicion. She hugged the cloth like armor, shivering violently. "This is Lucy," the older child said quickly. "She doesn't like big people. They scare her." Lucy ducked her face into the blanket again, but Ethan's attention returned to the first girl. "And your name?" The silence stretched before she answered. "Emma. And there's Rosie too." She crouched by a sagging structure of cardboard patched with plastic sheets. "Rosie, come out. It's okay." The box shifted and a tiny toddler crawled into view. Barely 2 years old, her hair tangled her cheeks, streaked with dirt. She clutched a cracked bottle, its nipple nearly chewed through. Her first instinct was to cling to Emma's clothes, hiding her face, until Emma pressed a crumb of bread into her hand. Rosie clapped with joy as if gifted the world. Ethan's chest constricted. 3 children. Alone. In the freezing Chicago winter. Emma straightened her tone matter-of-fact, but fierce. I eat first. If I'm okay tomorrow, Lucy and Rosie can have some. I don't want them to get sick. Her logic was brutal in its clarity. A 6-year-old had taken on the role of guardian, food tester, protector. Ethan thought of the rare vintages he had rejected the entrees sent back for trivial imperfections. And here was a child treating rotten bread as salvation. His carefully ordered world began to fracture. Emma tucked the loaf into a small box inside their makeshift shelter, careful as though locking away gold. She patted it once, then turned back to him, shoulders squared against the cold. Ethan lowered himself to her level, ignoring the sting of wet snow soaking his tailored suit. Emma, he said gently, what would you think if I offered you something better? Her eyes narrowed instantly, suspicion alive in them. A gift. We don't have money. We can't pay. The innocence of the statement cut him deeper than any boardroom betrayal. You don't have to pay, he whispered. What if I took you, Lucy and Rosie, somewhere warm, with real food? For a long moment, Emma searched his face, as if her life depended on reading the truth. Behind her, Lucy's eyes peeked out wide and hesitant. Rosie stumbled on unsteady legs, snowflakes caught in her tangled hair. Finally, Emma asked, her voice fragile but firm. Together we won't go if Rosie can't. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. Together. Always. Emma looked once more at the box where the moldy bread rested. Her voice dropped weighted far beyond her years. Can I keep it, just in case you're lying? He nodded again. Yes. Keep it safe. Only then did she slide her small trembling hand into his. And in that instant the empire. Ethan Walker had spent decades building crumbled into irrelevance. What mattered were not numbers, not contracts, not power. What mattered were 3 fragile lives in the snow, and the choice before him to walk away or to carry them into the warmth. Snow fell heavier as Ethan led Emma, Lucy, and Rosie through the streets. Their small hands clung to his, their steps faltering on the icy sidewalks. He hailed a black sedan, his driver startled when 3 ragged children climbed in behind him. The leather seats dwarfed their tiny frames, and Rosie's wide eyes darted nervously before she pressed herself against Emma. Back at his penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, warmth enveloped them. The girls stood frozen at the threshold, snow melting into puddles at their feet. The vast living room with its polished floors and towering windows seemed another planet. Emma gripped Lucy's hand as if bracing for rejection. It's all right, Ethan said, his voice softer than he remembered it could be. You're safe here. He ordered food, immediately simple dishes, not the delicate plates his chef usually prepared. Within minutes, steaming bowls of chicken noodle soup and warm rolls filled the table. The girls ate cautiously at first, as though it might be snatched away. But hunger soon overpowered fear. Lucy clutched her spoon with both hands, Rosie smeared broth across her cheeks, and Emma tried to ration her own bites, glancing between her sisters to make sure they had enough. Ethan watched in silence. A strange ache filled his chest, an ache he hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't pity, it was responsibility. After dinner, he found blankets, though the girls insisted on huddling together on a single couch. Rosie curled against Emma, Lucy tucked under Emma's arm. They were a fortress of three, unwilling to be separated, even by comfort. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't open his laptop. He sat in the chair opposite them, watching as their breathing slowed, as the lines of fear softened into sleep. He felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't define but knew he would never escape. News of his sudden change spread quickly. Within days, whispers echoed through Chicago's upper circles. Ethan Walker, the ruthless financier, had taken 3 homeless children into his penthouse. Cocktail chatter turned sharp headlines painted him as unstable, eccentric, even dangerous. And behind the headlines was Caroline. Caroline Walker had always been sharp as broken glass. She was his elder sister, a master of optics, her charm sharpened into a weapon long ago. She had tolerated Ethan's empire building only because it increased the family's fortune. But now, with him diverting attention and resources toward 3 stray children, she saw an opening. At a gala, she let her voice drip with false concern. "Ethan isn't well," she murmured to a reporter. "He's fragile since father's death. Bringing street children into his home, surely you see, it's not rational." By the week's end, articles bloomed across finance journals and gossip sites alike. Words like impulsive, reckless, unfit shadowed Ethan's name. Investors began to hesitate. The pressure mounted when Child Protective Services arrived at his door. Angela Morales led the team, her expression professional but conflicted. "Mr. Walker," she said firmly, "you cannot house these children without legal guardianship. For their well-being, we must place them in temporary care until the courts review your case." The girls panicked instantly. Emma clutched Rosie. Lucy sobbed into her blanket. "Please don't take us," Emma cried, her voice breaking. "We'll be good. We'll be quiet. Just don't split us up." Ethan's composure cracked. "Do you see their faces?" he demanded, his voice raw. "Do you hear them? You'll destroy them if you separate them." Angela's jaw tightened. She wasn't blind to the truth in his words, yet protocol weighed heavy. "I'm sorry," she whispered, more to herself than to him. As her team approached, Emma screamed his name. Lucy reached for him until her fingers were pried loose. Rosie sobbed so hard her tiny body shook. Ethan stood helpless, his fists clenched as the 3 were carried down the hall, each placed into separate cars. When the last door slammed, silence filled the street. Snow fell harder, burying his footprints, erasing the moment as if it had never existed. But for Ethan, nothing could erase it. His heart had been divided into 3 fragile pieces, and the system had just torn them away. That night, his phone rang. Caroline's voice slid through the line like poison. "You can't fight the system, Ethan. You may have money, but I have the law. The longer they're gone, the more they'll forget you." His knuckles whitened around the phone. "They're my family now. I won't let you destroy them." Caroline laughed, cold and triumphant. "Family, don't be ridiculous. They're pawns. If you want them back, sign the company over to me. Otherwise, I'll make sure they're scattered so far apart they'll never see each other again." The threat ignited something primal in him. For the first time in his life, Ethan's fortune felt worthless. Numbers and contracts couldn't protect Emma, Lucy, and Rosie. But he wasn't the man he once was. He wasn't just a financier anymore. He was a father. And fathers fought. He picked up the phone again and dialed Daniel Price. His voice was steel. "Prepare for war." The courtroom in downtown Chicago felt colder than the streets outside. Snow fell steadily against tall windows, muffling the city's noise. But inside, the air was heavy with tension. Ethan Walker sat at the defendant's table, his tailored suit immaculate, though his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Across the aisle, Caroline Walker entered with the confidence of a queen stepping into her throne room. Her legal team carried boxes of files, evidence stacked high like weapons of war. She leaned close to him as she passed, her voice a whisper sharp enough to cut. You can't win, Ethan. Judges respect law, not sentiment. By the time this ends, those girls won't even remember your name. Daniel Price touched Ethan's arm, grounding him. Let her talk. We fight with truth. The judge called the room to order. Caroline's attorneys moved first. They painted Ethan as impulsive, reckless a man, spiraling after personal grief. They showed photographs of him carrying Rosie through the snow, twisted into evidence of instability. They played recordings of his raised voice during CPS confrontations, framing him as volatile. They spoke of his empire crumbling under erratic decisions, implying he was unfit for guardianship. The gallery murmured. Reporters scribbled notes. Ethan sat motionless, absorbing every blow. When his turn came, Daniel rose. His voice was steady, deliberate. Your Honor, this case is not about wealth or reputation. It is about 3 children who were abandoned to the cold streets of Chicago. My client did not seek them out. He found them on the brink of starvation, and he did what any decent human being should have done. He gave them shelter. He gave them love. The judge listened, but remained stern expression unreadable. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge allowed Emma to testify. She was so small she had to climb onto the witness chair, her feet dangling far above the ground. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, but when she lifted her chin, her voice was clear. Mr. Walker was the first person who didn't walk away. Everyone else told us to go, but he stayed. He didn't let them take Rosie from us. He promised we'd never be split apart. Caroline's attorney objected, but the judge let Emma continue. Her eyes glistened, but she spoke with quiet strength. He's not just rich. He reads us stories at night. He makes us soup when we're sick. He holds Rosie when she cries. We're not scared when he's there. We're a family now. A hush fell over the room. Reporters lowered their pens, watching. Next was Lucy. Shy and trembling, she carried her blanket with her to the stand. At first, she spoke barely above a whisper, but when the judge asked her to tell the truth about Ethan, her voice steadied. He tells me not to be afraid of the dark, she said. He sits with me until I fall asleep. Nobody else does that. Only Daddy. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Caroline's face tightened, her composure cracking. Finally, Rosie was brought forward. Too young to testify in the traditional sense, she clung to Ethan's neck as he carried her to the front. When asked if she knew who he was, she didn't hesitate. Her small voice rang out innocent and sure. Daddy. The word silenced the chamber. Even hardened attorneys blinked against tears. The judge's stern mask shifted just slightly. Caroline rose in fury. This is manipulation. He has brainwashed these children using his wealth to play hero enough. Ms. Walker, the judge, cut in sharply. Your argument is noted, but what I see before me is evidence not of manipulation but of love. The final arguments were brief. Caroline's voice trembled with anger, insisting Ethan was unfit. Daniel countered with calm clarity, reminding the court that law exists to protect children, not destroy them. When the gavel struck, the decision echoed like thunder. Temporary custody is hereby granted to Mr. Ethan Walker. Adoption proceedings may follow pending further review. Emma burst into tears, this time of relief. Lucy laughed through her sobs. Rosie clapped her small hands, as if celebrating a miracle. Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of weeks lifting from his chest. Caroline's face blanched. For once her sharp tongue failed her. She gathered her papers, her empire of lies collapsing in silence. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions demanding a statement. But Ethan ignored them all. He walked down the courthouse steps with Emma gripping his hand, Lucy clutching his sleeve, and Rosie perched on his shoulder. The snow swirled around them, but the cold no longer mattered. For the first time in months, warmth radiated from within. He had not just won a case, he had reclaimed his family. Winter loosened its grip on Chicago slowly, but the cold lingered long enough to remind Ethan Walker of the night everything changed. Snow still lined the gutters when renovation crews arrived at the Viridian Conservatory. Once a palace for the wealthy, its crystal chandeliers and velvet booths were dismantled piece by piece. In their place came warm wood beams, murals, painted by local artists, and the steady hum of volunteers who believed in Ethan's vision. He had promised the girls something more than survival. He had promised them a future. The Hearth and Light Café was his answer. Emma, Lucy, and Rosie watched the transformation with wide eyes. Emma, now a little older, walked through the space with surprising authority. She inspected tables, asked volunteers if the chairs were strong enough, and reminded everyone that no child should ever feel invisible here. Lucy spent hours curled in a corner, with crayons sketching pictures she insisted should hang on the cafe's walls. Rosie toddled after workers, her giggles echoing through the half-finished dining room, warming the air better than any heater. Ethan devoted himself fully. Deals and stock prices no longer dictated his days. Instead, it was construction schedules, recipe tastings, and community outreach. He worked alongside carpenters, lifting beams with his own hands, his once polished shoes scuffed and stained. When donors questioned his sanity, he ignored them. When reporters accused him of performative charity, he said nothing. His only answer was in the work. Still shadows lingered. Caroline hadn't disappeared. Though her legal defeat had cost her standing, she remained a whisper in business circles, suggesting Ethan had ruined the Walker legacy. Gordon Hale, bitter at losing his restaurant's reputation, stoked rumours that Hearth and Light was unsustainable. Yet for every whisper of doubt, there was a louder voice of gratitude from those who stepped through the cafe's open doors. The grand opening came on a frosty December evening, exactly 1 year after the night Ethan first saw Emma in the snow. The girls insisted on being part of the ceremony. Emma wore a red dress that swayed as she walked her shoulders, straighter, her eyes brighter than the frightened child he had met. Lucy, wrapped in her favourite sweater, carried her once tattered blanket like a badge of honour, not shame. Rosie skipped between them ribbons in her hair, determined to hug every guest who entered. The cafe's exterior glowed with soft lights. Painted across the glass windows were words in bold white letters. No child leaves hungry. Inside, the smell of fresh bread and simmering soup replaced the sterile scent of elitism that had once defined the conservatory. Long communal tables filled the space, each one set with simple plates, baskets of rolls, and pitchers of warm cider. Volunteers bustled, children laughed, and for the first time in a long time, hope felt tangible. Ethan stepped onto the small platform at the front, his daughters at his side. The crowd quieted. Reporters lifted cameras, but he ignored their presence. His words were not for headlines. They were for the people in that room. A year ago he began his voice steady, though his throat tightened. I watched a little girl kneel in an alley and thank heaven for a piece of bread she pulled from the trash. That moment broke me. It shattered the man I thought I was, the man who believed success was measured only in profit. Her name is Emma, and she's standing here today with her sisters Lucy and Rosie. The crowd turned to the girls. Emma squeezed his hand, but lifted her chin proudly. Lucy clutched his sleeve while Rosie waved at the room with unabashed joy. They were not just children in need, Ethan continued. They were a family fighting to stay together in a world that wanted to tear them apart. And they taught me that real wealth isn't measured in accounts or assets. It's measured in love, in responsibility, in the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is why this cafe exists. So no child will ever have to choose between hunger and dignity again. Applause erupted, but it wasn't the polite clapping of investors or the forced cheer of social events. It was raw, heartfelt rising from people who understood hunger, who had lived in the margins. Then Emma tugged the microphone from his hand. Her voice, though small, carried across the room. When you're hungry, you feel like nobody sees you. People look away. But Mr. Walker, Daddy, saw us. He made us feel like we mattered. We want other kids to feel the same. The room went still. Some wiped their eyes. Others nodded, whispering agreement. Not to be left out, Lucy stepped forward. This cafe is for every kid who ever thought there was no place for them. Here, everyone belongs. And then Rosie determined to have the last word shouted with all the earnestness of a toddler. And the bread isn't green anymore. The laughter that followed was warm, genuine, mingled with tears. For the first time in months, Ethan felt at peace. That night, the first meal was served. Children sat side by side, strangers, sharing bowls of soup, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Volunteers moved gracefully, carrying baskets of warm rolls and slices of chocolate cake. Emma helped a girl her own age read from a donated book. Lucy told stories about princesses who fought dragons. Rosie slipped extra rolls to a boy half her size, giggling when he thanked her. Ethan sat back, his daughters close, and watched. Hearth and Light Café was more than a building. It was a promise that no child would ever again kneel in the snow and thank heaven for spoiled bread. And as he looked at Emma's steady gaze, Lucy's shy smile, and Rosie's uncontainable laughter, he knew the promise began with them. Months passed, and winter gave way to spring, but the memory of that frozen night in Kinsley Alley never faded. For Ethan Walker, it had become the dividing line of his life. Everything before felt hollow, everything after full of meaning. The Hearth and Light Café thrived. What had begun as a vision, fueled by grief and determination, grew into a sanctuary. Each day, children filled its tables, their laughter echoing against the mural-painted walls. Parents who had once been ashamed to ask for help now walked through its doors, without fear greeted with dignity instead of judgment. Volunteers called it a miracle. Ethan knew better. The miracle had always been 3 little girls in the snow. Emma blossomed, her cautious eyes now steady and confident. She often greeted newcomers, making them feel safe, in ways only someone who had once felt invisible could manage. Lucy found her voice telling stories to younger children, weaving hope into every tale. Rosie was the cafe's heartbeat, racing from table to table, her energy uncontainable, her joy infectious. Ethan sat many evenings in the corner of the cafe watching them. The man who once measured success in millions now counted it in moments. Emma's smile when she read a word aloud, Lucy's laughter when she conquered a fear, Rosie's arms flung around his neck after a long day. Caroline's shadow had faded. Her schemes, once sharp and threatening, now seemed distant. The community had turned against her brand of cruelty, and the power she craved slipped from her grasp. Ethan rarely thought of her any more. His war was over, and his victory was not in defeating her, but in protecting what truly mattered. One evening, as the cafe quieted and volunteers stacked chairs, Emma climbed into the seat beside him. She rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Daddy, do you think people will remember this place even when we're older?" Ethan wrapped his arm around her. "Yes, Emma, because this cafe isn't just about food. It's about being seen, about knowing you matter." Lucy stirred from her corner, clutching her old blanket like a relic, and added, "It's about not being afraid anymore." Rosie, already half asleep in his lap, murmured, "It's about love." The words struck Ethan deeper than any applause or recognition ever could. He looked at the three of them, his daughters, his family, and knew they had taught him more than he could ever give in return. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all true success, is not measured by what you keep, but by what you give. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10 and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story, where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail. Ways.